Hello, and welcome. Tonight we drift back into the quiet crossroads of history, to a moment when a nation stood divided and its destiny hung by a thread of smoke. The American Civil War, a storm that burned brother against brother, tore cities apart and reshaped the soul of a continent. But what if the story had ended differently? What if, beneath the drifting banners of gray, the South had won? What kind of America would we wake up to then? Let your mind wander now, across the still fields of a war that never truly ended, only changed its shape. Close your eyes and listen to the wind as it carries us to another version of history. A world where the Union fell silent, and the Confederacy rose to write its own fate. The war that once tore a nation in two now ends with the South's banner still flying. Mist drifts over the Mississippi, quiet and endless. The cannons are cold, their echoes swallowed by the river's current. On broken bridges and burnt towns, flags of gray ripple in uncertain triumph. The Union fractured like a mirror, each shard reflecting a different future. One side victorious, the other hollow with disbelief. The dream of America, split in two heartbeats, one beating with pride, the other with quiet grief. The world holds its breath, watching a story that has turned down a road it was never meant to walk. In the fields of Virginia, the smell of gunpowder lingers like an old prayer. Men who once marched for unity now trudge home under two different flags. The Confederacy stands battered, bruised, but alive. Richmond rises not in ruin, but in defiant rebirth. Jefferson Davis stands before his people, his voice trembling with exhaustion and pride. He promises peace, independence, a destiny of their own making. Yet beneath the applause, the question lingers: what has truly been won? Freedom for one or bondage for another? The fields know the truth. Victory always tastes of ashes. Across the South, church bells ring, not for mourning this time, but for deliverance. Plantation owners toast beneath chandeliers, whispering of prosperity's return. Cotton will once again be king. And yet beyond the candlelight, the night holds whispers. Voices of those left unfree, their songs drifting through the cypress and river reeds. History has changed its ending, but not its conscience. Somewhere in the distance, a child hums an old Union tune, soft, forbidden, but alive. In the North, the silence is heavier. Cities like Philadelphia and New York mourn not only their dead, but their ideals. A republic built on unity, now broken like glass. Factories that once armed the Union now fall still, their smoke thinning into the sky. Lincoln's portrait hangs in government halls like a ghost. He had spoken of a house divided, and now that house lies in two ruins. Letters from widows fill the post, unread and unanswered. A nation's dream fades beneath the sound of trains carrying veterans home to homes that no longer belong to the same country. Two Americas rise where one once stood. In the South, pride becomes currency. In the North, progress becomes salvation. The Mason-Dixon line hardens into a border of belief. Families torn apart by the war remain divided by the peace. Mothers weep over graves on both sides, whispering prayers to the same God who now watches two flags instead of one. The rivers, the mountains, the prairies, they do not understand this division. Nature still flows as one, even as man insists he cannot. In Richmond's new Capitol halls, the Confederacy begins to dream beyond survival. Diplomats from Britain and France arrive, their coats heavy with colonial perfume. They offer trade, alliance, and recognition for a price. Southern cotton fills European ships again, turning fields into gold mines and people into shadows. Old empires see a new partner rising. But behind the Southern charm and polished marble, cracks begin to spread. A nation born from rebellion now fears rebellion of its own making. Freedom, once its rallying cry, has become its quietest word. Meanwhile, the North remakes itself in steel and sorrow. Defeat breeds determination. New York's skyline climbs higher, Pittsburgh's furnaces burn hotter, Chicago hums with invention. Industry becomes identity. The North learns to live without the South and to thrive from its loss. A republic reborn in machinery and memory where progress replaces pride. It is a land where the scars of war become the sparks of innovation. Telegraphs sing, railroads stretch across prairies, and dreams of unity transform into dreams of power. As decades pass, the world's gaze returns across the Atlantic. The two Americas have become strange reflections of each other, one agrarian and traditional, the other industrial and restless. The Confederacy, proud but isolated, clings to its old order. The Union, wounded but awakening, becomes a giant of industry. Across their borders, spies trade whispers and goods. Peace, for all its promises, feels as fragile as truce. By the dawn of the 20th century, a new world begins to stir. When Europe falls into chaos, both Americas must choose their place in it. The Confederacy aligns with monarchies and merchants drawn by heritage and commerce. The North sides with democracy and invention, and on foreign battlefields, descendants of once brothers now face each other again. The thunder of cannons in France echoes faintly across the Atlantic, where history repeats itself in rhyme. The sons of the Civil War now fight under foreign flags, their hearts divided, yet still bound by the same soil. In this divided world, the South grows rich but restless. Its plantations evolve into empires of oil and trade. New cities bloom beneath magnolia skies, proud and glimmering. But the old divisions linger like ghosts in the marble. Songs of victory begin to sound like laments, and the promise of independence begins to weigh heavier than the chains it once sought to break. The North, meanwhile, becomes colder not in weather but in heart. Its progress comes at a price. Steel towers rise where ideals once stood. People move faster, speak less, dream louder. And sometimes when the factories go silent, they too wonder what might have been if the nation had stayed one. Historians of this world debate endlessly. Some say the South's victory preserved its soul. Others say it doomed it to repetition. But truth, as always, lives between the lines of what was lost and what was imagined. In this America that never was, freedom means different things to different men. And unity, that old, impossible dream, remains the ghost that haunts them both. Centuries pass. The rivers still flow indifferent to flags or borders. Children on both sides of history grow up learning different hymns, different heroes. But when they look at the stars, they see the same constellations. And perhaps somewhere deep inside the silence of time, the nation they both lost still breathes, waiting for the day when memory and forgiveness finally meet. Because in the end, victory and defeat are only stories men tell themselves. The land remembers everything, every cannon's roar, every whispered prayer, every unburied dream. The wind that sweeps across the Mississippi carries the voices of both sides now long gone, blending them into one endless hymn. A song not of triumph but of remembrance, not of division but of what might have been. And as night falls over this alternate America, two nations beneath the same stars, history exhales. The banners of blue and gray fade into silver under the moonlight. The rivers whisper once more, not of victory or loss, but of peace. A peace that never truly came, but perhaps in this quiet dream, finally has. The smoke clears at last. The thunder of cannon fades into whispers. Across the hills of Virginia, the air smells of rain and ash, the final breath of a storm that consumed a nation. The sun rises faintly over Richmond, its light struggling through a haze of soot and sorrow. The fields are quiet now. No drums, no cries, only the sound of wind brushing against torn banners half buried in the mud. The war is over, and the South has won. On the city's horizon, The Confederate flag drifts gently in the early morning light. It is not raised in defiance anymore, but in weary disbelief. Men who had fought for 4 long years watch it flutter above them, their faces marked by exhaustion, not joy. They had dreamed of this moment, sung of it in the dark of camps, but now that it has come, it feels distant, almost unreal. Victory has a strange silence to it. In Richmond's Capitol Square, crowds gather beneath the marble columns of the Confederate Congress. Dust still coats the statues, and the streets bear the scars of siege, shattered windows, charred timbers, broken wheels left in the gutters. Yet somehow, life begins again. A woman in mourning black sells bread near a fountain cracked by artillery fire. Children chase each other through alleys where soldiers once hid. And on the steps of the Capitol, Jefferson Davis steps forward to speak. He looks smaller now than the portraits ever showed a man carved from pride and exhaustion in equal measure. His voice trembles as it carries through the crowd. He speaks of deliverance, of divine favor, of a nation reborn through sacrifice. He calls it peace through independence. The people cheer because they need to believe him. They have buried too many sons to question the meaning of their victory. But even as the applause fades, the question lingers like a shadow in the air. What does freedom mean when it costs unity? In the quiet corners of Richmond, where the walls still smell of smoke, not everyone celebrates. There are whispers, soft, fearful, quickly silenced. Men who once dreamed of honor now stare into the distance, wondering if this was the dream they were meant to build. Somewhere on the edge of the city, a nurse tends to a Union prisoner left behind in a makeshift hospital. He does not speak. Neither does she. Their silence says what no flag can. The Capitol begins to breathe again. The Confederate Treasury prints new currency. The press hammers out proclamations of sovereignty. Messengers ride southward, bearing news of victory to Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans. Along the way they pass fields where bones still rest beneath the soil, where crows circle over forgotten trenches. The land remembers. And though men speak of peace, the ground itself murmurs something else, a restless kind of memory, a hum that will not fade. In Richmond's foundries, smoke rises again, this time not from war, but from rebuilding. The city hums with cautious optimism. Blacksmiths return to their forges. Farmers return to their plows. The first Confederate ships set sail again, carrying cotton to Europe's hungry ports. And in London, in Paris, in Madrid, the news spreads quickly. The Confederate States of America recognized, independent, triumphant. Diplomats toast in candlelit halls. Merchants sign new contracts. And across the Atlantic, old empires smile at the birth of a new one. The southern ports open once more, their docks crowded with foreign ships bearing silk, sugar, and steel. Trade flows like blood through reopened veins. To the world's eyes, the Confederacy looks reborn, proud, defiant, and free. But beneath the polished surface, cracks begin to form. The war may be over, but the spirit of rebellion that birthed it cannot easily rest. For every celebration in Richmond, there is silence in the fields beyond. The enslaved watch their masters toast to victory, their own freedom postponed, denied, or buried beneath new laws. The songs of the enslaved continue quiet, haunting, persistent, carried on the wind through the magnolia groves. They sing not of victory, but of waiting. Waiting for a promise the world has already forgotten. In the halls of government, Jefferson Davis writes letters by candlelight. To foreign ministers, to generals, to governors of the 11 proud states that now make up his Confederacy. He speaks of unity, of destiny, of the South's divine mission to preserve its way of life. But in private, his hand trembles. The treasury is thin, the roads are broken, the people are tired. and the ghost of the Union still lingers just beyond the horizon, wounded, but watching. Somewhere far to the north, in a quiet office dimly lit by oil lamps, a man once called President reads the reports. Abraham Lincoln, now a leader without a country, writes in silence. He does not curse the South. He does not seek revenge. He only writes one line, simple, weary, and full of sorrow. May history be kind even if men are not. Back in Richmond, the city rebuilds not only its walls, but its soul. Theaters reopen. Church bells ring again. A Confederate anthem replaces the old star-spangled banner in the hearts of the people. In the streets, Confederate veterans in gray coats march through the dust, their boots thudding against the cobblestones in slow, uneven rhythm. Children watch from windows, their eyes wide with awe, seeing heroes, not realizing those heroes still carry nightmares behind their medals. And yet even here there is beauty. The magnolia trees bloom once more, their scent filling the air like forgiveness. The James River glitters with sunlight, carrying away the ashes of war. Women hang white linens from balconies, symbols of both surrender and peace. For a fleeting moment, Richmond feels whole again, as if history itself wishes to rest. But peace is fragile, and independence, as the Confederacy will soon learn, is a burden heavy to bear. The first cracks appear in the whispers of the poor. Soldiers return home to empty fields, their farms burned, their families gone. Promised pensions never come. In taverns, men speak of being forgotten by the government they fought for. The same spirit that once rose against the Union now begins to stir against its own leaders. Independence was meant to bring dignity, but hunger knows no allegiance. In the plantations, labor returns to its old rhythm, whips, chains, overseers, and cotton weighed by the pound. But the world beyond the South is changing. Britain's parliament debates the morality of its alliance. Newspapers in Paris print cautious editorials. Even some southern preachers begin to question the path their nation has chosen. Whispers of reform spread through quiet halls, dangerous words in a nation built on preservation. Jefferson Davis senses it too. He grows older, thinner, haunted by the contradiction of his victory. At night, he walks the verandas of the executive mansion, staring across the dark city. He listens to the cicadas and the distant songs of freedmen who were never freed. The war had been fought for independence, but what if the real battle, the one for the South's soul, was only beginning? Richmond glows beneath the moonlight, serene and deceptive. To travelers and foreign dignitaries, it is a city of marble and grace, proof of Southern triumph. But beneath the cobblestones, the ground still remembers the blood that fed it. It hums softly, like a memory half buried but never gone. The cannons may be silent, but the echoes remain. And somewhere in the countryside, far from the capital's splendor, an old soldier sits on his porch, watching the stars. He fought at Gettysburg, at Antietam, at the Wilderness. He lost friends, brothers, and a part of himself in every battle. He listens to the night and wonders, did we truly win? The cicadas don't answer, but the wind through the trees sounds like a sigh. The Confederacy stands proud yet uncertain, its people free yet divided, its victory solid yet fragile. A nation born from rebellion must now learn how to govern without one. It must define freedom while denying it to others. It must hold faith in the same ideals it once tore apart to pursue. And so the flag over Richmond flutters bright and bold, but trembling slightly in the wind. It waves not only for triumph, but for the weight that triumph carries. Every thread woven into that fabric holds a contradiction, honor and loss. Pride and grief, freedom and bondage, victory and the quiet knowledge that history never ends where men wish it to. The city sleeps that night under a calm sky. Fires burn low in hearths. The bells of St. Paul's strike midnight, echoing across the hills. And as the last smoke from the war fades into the stars, Richmond dreams not of empire nor vengeance, but of peace. A peace that feels almost real, almost earned, almost enough to quiet the ghosts that still wander its streets. Because somewhere deep in the South's proud heart, beneath the marble and magnolia, beneath the songs and speeches, a truth stirs quietly, that no victory, and no matter how glorious, can ever silence the ache of what was lost. And so the flag above Richmond flies on, not just as a symbol of what the South became, but as a reminder of what all of America might have been. The war has ended, but the silence that follows is not peace. It is a strange, uneasy quiet, the kind that hangs between breaths. A truce signed not by forgiveness, but by exhaustion. The cannons are silent, yet the hearts of men still thunder with everything left unsaid. Two nations now breathe where one once stood. The Union in the North, proud, wounded, rebuilding. The Confederacy in the South, victorious, scarred, uncertain. A single continent divided by more than rivers or railways. Divided by memory, by grief, by the stories men tell themselves to make sense of survival. The border between them, once just a line on a map, now feels like a scar on the earth. The Mason-Dixon line drawn not in ink but in blood. It stretches across farmlands, forests and mountains, but also through living rooms, through dinner tables, through the spaces between brothers who no longer speak. The land itself seems to hold its breath, unsure which anthem to remember. In the North, flags hang at half-mast for dreams that died young. Cities like Philadelphia and Boston hum again with industry, but the hum feels hollow. The smoke that rises from their factories is tinged with mourning. They have survived defeat but not recovered from it. A generation of men return to find a country that feels foreign, a home that no longer exists in the same world. They fought for unity, and now must live without it. In the South, victory has already begun to fade into myth. Stories of honor and destiny replace the truth of hunger and ruin. Children grow up hearing of a righteous cause, not the screams from the battlefield. The Confederacy tells itself it was chosen, blessed, justified. But beneath the magnolia trees and marble balconies there is unease. The pride is loud, but the doubts whisper louder. Along the border towns, small, quiet places between the two new nations, people live in the gray. Farmers trade across enemy lines. Lovers send letters wrapped in tobacco and tears. Families divided by politics still find ways to share a meal. It is here, more than in any capital or courthouse, that the real cost of victory is counted. A woman in Maryland keeps two photographs on her mantle, one sun in blue, one in gray. She cleans both frames the same way, every morning humming the same hymn. When neighbors ask which flag she salutes, she only says, "The one they both died under." In her voice, the war still echoes. Letters drift between the borders like ghosts. Folded pages carried by couriers, sewn into coats, hidden in barrels of grain. Each one a thread of memory trying to sew together what history has torn apart. "Are you well?" one letter asks. "Do you still play the fiddle?" asks another. Some never reach their destination. Others are kept for a lifetime, the ink fading slower than the longing. In Washington, the former Union capital, the great dome of the Capitol still stands, but it feels smaller now, lonelier. The government of the North speaks of rebuilding, of renewal. But its speeches echo in half-empty chambers. The stars on its flag are fewer now, and their absence feels heavier than any defeat. In taverns, old soldiers talk about the next generation, the one that will remember, the one that will someday rise again. They call it patience. They call it faith, but deep down they know it is only grief wearing different clothes. In Richmond, the Confederate capital shines brighter than ever. Gas lamps glow in the streets at night, and carriages roll past grand houses rebuilt from war's ashes. Politicians speak of destiny, of Southern glory, of divine providence. But beneath the applause, the air feels fragile, stretched thin by expectation. Every victory brings new questions. Every toast tastes faintly of fear. For all its pride, the Confederacy cannot escape its past. The fields that fed its wealth are haunted by the very hands that made it. The songs of the enslaved drift through the night, slow, mournful, unstoppable. They sing not for rebellion but remembrance. Every note is a quiet defiance, a promise that time will not forget what chains have hidden. And though their voices are soft, they carry farther than any cannon ever could. Meanwhile, in the north, a different song rises, the song of machinery, of change. Steam whistles, telegraph clicks, hammers striking steel. Progress becomes the Union's new religion. Factories replace farms, and invention replaces faith. But in their rush to build, they leave little room to heal. Men lose themselves in labor because work is easier than remembering. Women knit flags for a nation that no longer exists as they dreamed it. Children grow up hearing stories of the South not as kin, but as a shadow to overcome. The two Americas live side by side, but they no longer speak the same language of the heart. The North defines freedom as movement, invention, speed. The South defines it as heritage, land, tradition. Each sees the other as lost. Each believes it is the true heir of America. And between them stretches a silence wider than any battlefield. On the border, trains run once again. Passengers cross with documents stamped by two governments, two currencies, two nations, pretending they can remain apart forever. But in the quiet of the rail cars, old soldiers still nod to one another. They know better. They can still smell the smoke of the same fields. They can still remember the faces of the men they fought. And in those shared memories, something still connects them, something neither flag can erase. A journalist from England travels the divided continent in 1870. He writes of two Americas, one draped in grey, graceful and decaying, the other dressed in iron and ambition. He calls them mirror nations, each reflecting the other's flaws in sharper light. He wonders aloud whether both are chasing ghosts, one haunted by the past, the other by the future. In New Orleans, jazz is born wild, mournful, beautiful. It crosses borders more easily than armies ever did. Northern merchants hear it, carry it home, and soon it plays in Chicago, in New York, and Philadelphia. Music becomes the one language the two Americas still share, a heartbeat that remembers before words can. In those melodies, the war is neither lost nor won. It simply lingers, transformed into art, into rhythm, into something too human to be contained by flags. Still, politics do what music cannot. The Confederacy grows cautious, protective inward. Its government clings to old values like relics, fearing change more than poverty. The Union grows restless, impatient, determined to prove its progress to the world. It builds cities of glass and smoke, its skylines rising higher each year. Both nations begin to forget why they ever fought, only that they must remain separate. And yet, fate has a way of refusing to stay divided. Storms cross borders. Floods don't care for politics. When the Mississippi rises, it drowns both flags alike. Farmers from north and south alike haul sandbags together, shoulder to shoulder, without asking names. In those moments, rare, fleeting, the river seems to whisper that they were always one people, still sharing the same earth, the same rain. In the hills of Tennessee, an old veteran plants a small garden where his regiment once camped. He writes in his journal, "The war never ended. It only moved inside us." He's right. The battle now lives in memory, fought quietly in stories, in silence, in the ways people choose to remember or forget. Children in the South learn poems about victory, gallantry, God's chosen land. Children in the North learn lessons about courage, progress, and endurance. Each side teaches pride, but neither teaches peace. And so a new generation grows up standing on opposite banks of the same river, waving at each other, never crossing. Years pass. Railways spread like veins. Telegraphs knit the continent together again in secret, as if history itself cannot bear to stay apart. A farmer in Georgia sends cotton to a mill in Pennsylvania. A machinist in Chicago repairs a southern locomotive. Trade begins to blur what politics have divided. Money, unlike memory, knows no borders. Still, there are reminders everywhere. Every courthouse in the South bears marble names of its fallen sons. Every northern school hangs maps that stop at the border. Even the stars above seem to shimmer differently when seen from each side. But on quiet nights under the same moon, both nations look up and think the same unspoken thought. We are still one people. We just forgot how to be. In 1885, an aging Abraham Lincoln, no longer president, but remembered by both sides, dies quietly in his Springfield home. His funeral draws mourners from both nations, some in blue, some in gray, all standing together beneath a cold spring rain. No speeches, no politics, only silence. For a brief moment, it feels as if the war's last echo has faded. But history, like the soil, is never truly quiet. New seeds of division soon take root. In the South, independence hardens into isolation. In the North, progress turns into arrogance. Both wear different crowns of pride, both forget the cost of wearing them. And yet, deep beneath it all, the memory of unity remains faint, flickering, but alive. Sometimes, on clear autumn mornings, when the air is still and the leaves drift gently down, an old soldier walking the border will swear he hears it. A distant sound of drums, not of war, but of homecoming. A rhythm carried by the wind, blending blue and gray into one long, slow heartbeat. It is not the past calling. It is memory, whispering that even in division, there is still belonging. From Washington to New Orleans, the land itself remembers. The rivers run the same courses they always have. The mountains stand unmoved. The prairies stretch endless and quiet. Nature does not choose sides, only men do. And when men are gone, the earth reclaims everything they built, every border they drew, every song they sang of victory or loss. Two Americas remain, two flags, two stories told to children who will never know what it felt like to be one. And yet, in dreams, they are still united. Under the same stars, under the same sky, bound not by politics but by memory. Because memory, unlike history, does not choose winners. It simply remembers everything. The years drift by like slow-moving clouds over the cotton fields. The Confederacy stands firm, a new nation born from the old, its pride stitched from gray cloth, and the memory of victory. But beneath the hymns of triumph and the marble speeches of Richmond's grand halls, another sound lingers, the quiet, aching rhythm of chains. For though the South has won its war, it has lost its soul. Emancipation never came, or came too late, and when it finally whispered through the winds of rumor, it found itself smothered by laws, by custom, by fear. Plantations stretch wider than ever, cotton glimmering white beneath the southern sun, as if the earth itself refuses to forget what made men rich and others invisible. The grand houses rise again, columns polished, porches swept clean, verandas humming with the laughter of a new generation that never saw the war. They speak of prosperity, of God's favor, of destiny fulfilled. But far beyond the gardens and gaslight, in the shadows of those same estates, the old order endures. Fields echo with the same cries of command, the same hymns of endurance. Names change, faces age, but the song of labor under bondage remains the same. In the hush before dawn, when mist curls low over the cane and cotton, the enslaved still gather by whisper. Their voices are soft, careful, woven with secrecy. They speak not of rebellion, that word has grown too dangerous, but of hope, of dreams that sound like freedom though none have yet seen it. They sing to the stars, to rivers, to ancestors who crossed oceans in chains and still somehow remembered the language of dignity. Each verse is a map, a secret path of spirit leading away from despair. One woman, her hands raw from harvest, hums an old melody that her mother once taught her. It begins as a lullaby, but ends as a prayer. "Lord, carry me home," she whispers, though she does not know where home is anymore, only that it lies somewhere beyond the horizon, past the line of the overseer's whip and the reach of any flag. The sound drifts through the night, rising over the magnolias carried by the humid air. It travels farther than she ever will. In Richmond, President Davis gives speeches about order and heritage, about protecting the Southern way of life. Crowds cheer, church bells ring, and newspapers call the Confederacy the guardian of civilization. But far from those streets of marble and oil lamps, the world begins to listen, and not kindly. Across the Atlantic, in London and Paris, whispers circulate through salons and embassies that the Confederacy, proud victor of its war, has become a prisoner of its own past. Britain, once tempted by Southern cotton, now grows uneasy. The empire that had abolished slavery half a century before cannot ignore what still stains the South's hands. A British journalist visits Charleston in 1872. He writes of the city's beauty, its elegance, its music, but his words darken when he reaches the outskirts where the fields begin. He describes faces too old for their years, voices too weary for their youth. He sends his report home, and though the South dismisses it as foreign slander, the words linger across oceans. Soon ships from Europe begin to dock less often. Trade slows. The Confederate dollar, once strong, begins to tremble. But pride, as ever, refuses to bend. The plantations, desperate to maintain their hold, turn to debt and deception. Children are born into the same fate as their parents, names recorded in ledgers beside bushels of cotton and barrels of sugar. The owners call them property. The preachers call it divine order. But the songs in the fields tell a different truth, that no chain lasts forever, that no nation can bind the human spirit without binding itself. By the late 1870s, rebellion becomes a ghost story whispered in slave quarters. Men vanish into the swamps, women disappear under the cover of storms. Some are caught and brought back in chains, others are never found. There are tales of entire families crossing into the north under new moons, following rivers like veins of salvation. The Confederacy calls them fugitives. The North calls them miracles. And though the Union stands apart, weakened by its loss, its conscience is restless. Abolitionists who once marched with banners now work in secret, smuggling runaways through an invisible web of allies and sympathizers. Old routes of the Underground Railroad are revived, stretching not from south to north this time, but from despair to dignity. Hidden churches, friendly ports, even sympathetic soldiers from the border states lend quiet aid. Every person who crosses into freedom becomes a whisper carried back southward. They made it. You can too. In the Confederate heartland, the economy swells and cracks at once. Cotton is gold again, but it is cursed gold dependent on labor the world refuses to buy with clean hands. Factories rise in the North, powered by free men and new machines. The South remains trapped in its fields, its future tied to the same crops that once burned in war. And beneath it all, in the quiet corners of the night, the old hymns keep returning. Steal away to Jesus, they sing. Go down, Moses. Every note is a sermon and a secret code. Every verse carries the same promise that even in a world built to deny it, freedom is not forgotten. Children grow up knowing both pride and pain. They are taught that their chains are natural, that obedience is salvation. Yet they see the overseer's trembling hand, the fear that hides behind cruelty. They see the way their elders look at the horizon when the sun sets, not as slaves looking at distance, but as prophets reading a promise in the light. Somewhere in Alabama, a preacher named Elijah begins to speak of a coming storm, not of thunder, but of justice. He preaches under trees, his voice soft but firm. The Lord will not forget, he says. The Lord may be slow, but he does not sleep. His words travel by mouth, by memory, by melody, and soon even the masters begin to sense it that something is shifting beneath the surface. A slow trembling like roots cracking stone. By 1880, foreign pressure grows louder. France, then Britain, then even Canada refuse Confederate ships in certain ports. Newspapers in Europe print sketches of chained workers, of cotton fields drenched in sweat, of the hypocrisy of a nation that calls itself Christian but denies its brothers' humanity. The Confederate government issues statements, denies everything, speaks of domestic order. But the world no longer believes it. The South's isolation deepens. Its pride becomes armor, and its armor becomes its prison. Yet even in that darkness, light glimmers. Secret schools emerge in the shadows of plantations taught by freedmen, Northerners, and even sympathetic Southerners who know the truth cannot be silenced forever. Children trace letters in the dirt, whispering the alphabet as though it were a spell. Each word they learn is a key, each page a small rebellion. One girl writes her name for the first time, Sarah, and in doing so claims something her ancestors never could, the right to exist in her own voice. Freedom begins not as a revolution but as a whisper, a mother teaching her son to read by candlelight, a man refusing to bow, a song that rises a little louder than before. Change does not come in armies this time, but in faith, quiet, persistent, unyielding faith. In the grand halls of Richmond, whispers of unrest reach the ears of men who once led armies. They dismiss them at first. But the fires of rebellion do not always announce themselves. They smolder. They spread through hearts before they ever touch the fields. And when they finally ignite, they do so not with rifles or banners, but with courage too simple to name. 1,000 acts of defiance ripple through the countryside, a worker refusing to pick, a woman refusing to kneel, a child refusing to forget, each one a spark, each one small enough to be crushed, yet together, unstoppable. The Confederacy sends soldiers, laws, punishments. But you cannot silence a people who have learned to speak in songs. The hymns grow louder. The night fills with rhythm drums carved from barrels, voices raised under the stars. Freedom, once a distant dream, begins to take shape in sound. And once the world hears it, it cannot be unheard. In the North, newspapers pick up fragments of these songs, printing verses without understanding their origin. Readers call them Negro spirituals. But to those who sing them, they are not art, they are prophecy. Each word carries memory, faith, rebellion, love. They are the chains melting into melody. They are history, reclaiming its own voice. By the 1890s, the South stands at a crossroads it can no longer ignore. Its economy wavers, its people whisper, its borders tighten. Some leaders call for reform, for gradual emancipation to appease foreign trade. Others cling harder to tradition, fearing what freedom might demand in return. And somewhere in the fields, where the night air hums with crickets and memory, an old man kneels in prayer. He has lived his entire life in bondage. He has seen friends sold, children lost, and dreams buried under centuries of silence. But as he prays, a single tear traces down his cheek, not of sorrow, but of faith. Because he knows somehow that no matter how long it takes, the chains will break. Freedom, after all, is patient. It waits in the soil. It hides in the songs. It grows in the hearts of those who refuse to forget who they are. And even if the Confederacy stands for 100 years, even if its marble monuments rise taller than the trees, the truth will outlast them. For the conscience of the world does not rest. Ships that once turned away from southern ports now sail with missionaries, educators, writers. Books are smuggled in, cameras begin to capture the truth. The lens does what armies could not, it forces the world to see. Photographs of tired hands, of scarred backs, of eyes too old for their faces begin to circulate in newspapers abroad. The myth of the noble Confederacy begins to crumble beneath the weight of its own reflection. And somewhere deep in the heart of Georgia, a boy stands at the edge of a field at sunrise. He has never known freedom. But as he watches the light spill across the horizon, he imagines what it might feel like to walk where he wishes, to speak his name aloud, to live without fear. He doesn't know it yet, but that imagining is the first step toward history's turning. Because the world can deny truth for a time, but it cannot erase it. Just as the river wears down stone, so does hope wear down tyranny. And in this Confederate America, triumphant yet trembling, the first cracks begin to show. The songs grow louder, the world grows restless, and the chains that never broke begin at last to tremble. The war had ended, but for the North, peace was a stranger. The fields that once thundered with cannon fire were quiet now, yet the silence carried the heavy pulse of something new, not surrender, but transformation. Across the border, the Union rose again, not as it had been, but as something harder, colder, and infinitely more determined. Defeat has a strange way of forging steel in the hearts of men. And here, in this wounded republic, that steel began to take shape in the foundries, in the factories, in the roaring cities where the air shimmered with smoke and ambition. The South had won the war of muskets and men, but the North was preparing to win the war of time. Steamships churned across the Great Lakes, their engines pounding like iron hearts. Railroads stitched the broken land together, not with compassion, but with progress. Every mile of track laid was an act of defiance, a promise that defeat would not define them. Where once blue uniforms marched, now came machines. Where the sound of drums had filled the air, now came the hammer's ring, the hiss of furnaces, the hum of invention. Cities rose from ashes, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, not in marble but in brick and steel. Smokestacks clawed at the gray sky, painting the heavens black with industry. Men in soot-stained shirts spoke not of honor or glory, but of production quotas, of engines and profit and invention. The battlefield had shifted from the rolling plains of Virginia to the roaring veins of industry. The Union, divided and humbled, turned inward. They no longer sought to save the South. They sought to surpass it. The dream of one nation under God became a new kind of faith in machines, in progress, in the relentless march of innovation. If the Confederacy had claimed divine victory, the North would claim dominion over the future. Factories multiplied along the rivers. Steam filled the air. The clang of iron became the new anthem of the Republic. And beneath that noise, something profound began to take shape, a belief that the human hand could build what the sword could not. Children of veterans worked 12-hour shifts in textile mills, the sons of soldiers hammering steel rails that stretched from coast to coast. Widows of the war opened boarding houses for immigrants who came in endless waves, carrying with them languages, hunger, and hope. The cities swelled with their footsteps. The nights glowed orange from furnace light. In this new North, sorrow became momentum. And from the embers of loss, a new kind of nation was being forged, one made not of unity, but of endurance. The men who had seen battle no longer spoke of it. They poured their memories into work. They built bridges over rivers that once divided them. They dug tunnels through mountains, as though they could carve a new path through the very bones of the continent. And in every stroke of labor, in every wheel turning, there was the echo of something unsaid, that the war might have been lost, but the idea of progress never would be. The North began to change the rhythm of the world. Telegraphs whispered messages faster than armies once marched. Steam engines carried news, goods, and dreams from one coast to another. Iron became the language of power. And through that power, a quiet kind of revenge took root, not of hatred, but of achievement. In the universities that survived the war, minds turned from theology to technology. Where sermons once filled halls, now lectures on engineering and chemistry echoed. Electricity flickered to life in laboratories. Inventors with soot-streaked faces and restless eyes experimented with light, sound, and motion. The North was no longer a land of heroes and generals, it was becoming a land of inventors and dreamers. And yet, under all that progress, the ghost of loss remained. Every bridge was a monument to something broken. Every factory, a tomb for what had been sacrificed. Mothers still kept photographs of sons who had never returned. Veterans with missing limbs stood by iron furnaces, feeling the same heat they once felt in battle. The industrial fire reminded them pain could be turned into purpose. And so they worked. In the heart of Pennsylvania, a city called Pittsburgh began to roar. Iron ore and coal, black and red, Earth's own lifeblood flowed together into furnaces that never cooled. The rivers there no longer ran clear. They shimmered with oil and ash. But from that filth came something magnificent: steel, the new spine of the North. With it they built ships, bridges, and cities that climbed toward the clouds. The Confederacy might have ruled the land, but the Union would rule the age of machines. By the 1880s, northern cities had become temples of innovation. Elevators, electric lamps, typewriters, phonographs, the hum of progress filled every corner. Factories beat like iron hearts, pulsing with the promise of a different future. The North, though defeated on the battlefield, now marched under a new banner, not of stars or stripes, but of gears and smoke. From the Atlantic to the Great Plains, the railroads stretched endlessly. The trains roared like beasts of iron and fire, connecting towns, cities, and dreams. Every rail hammered into place was a declaration: we are still here. Each whistle that echoed through the night sounded like the cry of a nation reborn. The South had its victory. The North had its vengeance, not in blood, but in brilliance. Yet the world beyond watched closely. Europe, once sympathetic to the South, now turned its gaze to the North's rising might. British investors, French industrialists, German engineers all began to visit the great iron cities of the Union. They saw in this defeated republic something extraordinary, the ability to rise higher after loss than it ever did in triumph. They saw resilience turned into machinery, sorrow turned into science, and quietly they began to invest. The Confederacy's ports bustled with cotton and tobacco, but their ships carried the past. The Union ships forged in northern steel carried the future. Trade routes shifted. New alliances formed. And slowly the balance of the world began to tilt once more. Inside the growing cities, the air shimmered with invention and inequality alike. The factory whistle replaced the church bell. Children ran barefoot through soot-covered streets, their laughter swallowed by the hum of progress. Men drank their wages away in taverns lit by gas lamps. Women stitched shirts in rooms so small they could barely breathe. Progress had a price, but the North was willing to pay it. Writers began to emerge, chronicling this new age stories of machines and men, of ambition and exhaustion. They saw the world changing faster than the human heart could keep up. And though their words warned of greed and excess, they also spoke of something miraculous, that humanity could dream beyond its own scars. In time, the great northern cities became beacons of modernity. Electric lines strung across streets. Steam trams rumbled through fog. Newspapers printed headlines in bold letters, a new age of American industry. It was not the same America that had gone to war. It was harder, faster, louder. But beneath the noise there was still a pulse of remembrance. They had lost their brothers, their unity, their flag, but they had gained something eternal motion. From the laboratories of Boston came whispers of new sciences. A young inventor experiments with alternating current, dreaming of cities lit by invisible power. Another tinkers with engines that might one day fly. The North becomes a forge not just of steel, but of imagination. Every new discovery feels like a step away from defeat. Every glowing filament, every turning wheel feels like redemption. And still they look south. Across the border, fields of cotton sway under the same sun. The Confederacy, proud and unchanging, continues its way of life. But in the North, time no longer stands still. Each year brings something the South cannot match: factories that run day and night, schools filled with engineers, cities that never sleep. The distance between the two nations is no longer measured in miles, but in centuries. By the turn of the century, the North has become something unrecognizable, a republic of rails and machines driven by the hum of electricity and ambition. The stars and stripes still fly, but their meaning has changed. They no longer symbolize unity, they symbolize endurance. A flag for those who refuse to fade. The people of the North no longer dream of reuniting the nation, they dream of surpassing it. In their hearts, they know victory is not measured in borders, but in progress. And so they build higher, faster, further. Skyscrapers pierce the clouds like monuments to resilience. Bridges span rivers once stained by war. And every spark that leaps from an electric line feels like history catching its breath. Still, on quiet nights when the furnaces dim and the factories fall silent, you can almost hear the echoes of another time, the cries, the songs, the footsteps of a different America. It's there in the rustle of papers on a workbench, in the sigh of wind through the girders of a half-built bridge. The ghosts of the Union soldiers who once fought for unity now watch over a nation reborn from defeat. They do not march anymore, they build. The North, remade in steel, has traded the dream of one nation for the dream of endless creation. Its people move with purpose, its cities burn with light. And though they rarely speak of the war, it lives on not as sorrow but as motion. Because every furnace, every train, every machine is a reminder of that ancient vow whispered in the smoke of battlefields long ago. We will rise again. And they did. The guns have fallen silent in the Americas, yet across the Atlantic the echoes still roll through marble halls and candlelit studies. In London, in Paris, in the palaces of Vienna, men in tailored coats lean over maps of a continent now split in two. The ink is still wet on the treaties that ended nothing, and every diplomat feels it, the scent of opportunity carried on the ocean wind. The Confederacy, victorious and wounded, stands draped in the pride of survival. Its ports, once blockaded, now glimmer with lanterns again. Ships return from Cuba and Nassau, from the Caribbean Isles and the misty harbors of Liverpool, their holds heavy with cotton and the promise of profit. Europe watches the smoke rise from those ports and sees more than trade. It sees a door reopen to the old world's ambitions. In the salons of Paris, the chatter turns to the new world's newest power. Napoleon III strokes his moustache and wonders aloud whether liberty can truly thrive in halves. His ministers speak of investments, of southern railroads built with French steel, of the gold that might flow from reopened trade in tobacco, sugar, and rice. Across the Channel, British merchants write to their agents in Charleston and Savannah, smelling in the wind the ghost of empire revived through commerce rather than conquest. But beneath the grandeur of these councils lies something older, darker, a nostalgia for control. The same powers that once carved Africa and Asia into kingdoms of profit now see in the divided Americas a new canvas. To them, the Confederate victory does not mark freedom's endurance. It marks the return of hierarchy, of aristocracy reborn under a different flag. The Southern diplomats, proud in gray and silver, walk the boulevards of Paris with cautious hope. They speak of sovereignty, of partnership, of shared values between gentlemen. Yet behind each toast clinks the faint note of dependency. For the South's cotton, though abundant, cannot feed its own ambitions. Machines must come from Manchester, credit from London, weapons from Belgium. And so the victors of their own rebellion find themselves again entangled in the threads of foreign need. In Richmond, Jefferson Davis reads the European papers and senses both triumph and trap. The headlines call him president, not rebel, yet each editorial whispers that the Confederacy survives only by grace of foreign appetite. He stands upon the balcony of the new Capitol, watching workers rebuild the marble steps, and wonders whether independence bought with export bonds can ever be called freedom. Beyond the sea, the monarchs weigh their choices. The British Crown, cautious but tempted, dispatches envoys with quiet instructions: secure the trade, but not the alliance. France sends its ships not as fleets of war, but of commerce. The Confederacy welcomes them all. Docks brim with barrels of cotton and crates of cannon, while the cities bloom with European finery: French silk in Atlanta, British iron in Mobile, Dutch banking houses in New Orleans. The South feels reborn into modernity, yet beneath its charm runs the same current that once pulled colonies into debt. In the North, the Union watches with a clenched jaw. Newspapers print caricatures of European aristocrats shaking hands with slaveholders, and the outrage burns in every parlor. Yet the Union, now an industrial republic, knows that anger cannot close ports. The Atlantic has become a web, and both halves of America are caught in it. From Boston to Chicago, steel rails gleam in the moonlight like veins of determination. The Union's answer to Southern trade is not embargo, but expansion. It builds, it innovates, it dreams of electric light while the South glows with candle flame. Still, across the Atlantic, the fascination deepens. British poets romanticize the gallantry of Southern generals, their verses turning tragedy into legend. French artists paint the surrender at Appomattox as if it were an act of noble theater, a duel between equals rather than a collapse of unity. The myth of the Confederacy becomes Europe's mirror, reflecting its own longing for a world of manners and mastery untouched by the machinery of the coming age. In Vienna, the diplomats toast to balance. Two Americas mean two opportunities. Loans are extended, credit guaranteed, and soon Confederate bonds rest in the vaults of Europe's great banks. Money flows westward, raw goods flow east. The Atlantic becomes not a barrier but a bridge of mutual dependence. The Confederacy begins to modernize under foreign tutelage, its cities stitched together with rails financed by British capital. The South begins to dream of empire itself, of Cuba, of Mexico, of the Caribbean. The hunger that once drove cotton now turns outward, seeking new lands to shape in its image. But every empire born of trade bears the seed of surrender. As the ports of Charleston swell with foreign goods, whispers grow in the taverns and papers: who truly rules the South? Is it the president in Richmond, or the bankers in London? Is it the planters, or the men who fix the prices of cotton in Manchester? The Confederacy, born of the desire to break free, begins to feel the weight of invisible chains. And yet in the grand parlors of Europe, few see it that way. To them, the New World's division is proof that democracy was a fragile dream. See how quickly liberty consumes itself, they say over their brandy glasses. The republic that preached equality now lies in halves. They do not see the faces in the fields, the hands that still toil without pay, the quiet songs of defiance that float over the rivers at night. To them, history has simply corrected itself. As the 1870s unfold, Europe's gaze turns not only westward but inward. Industrial unrest stirs their own cities. London's Workers' March, Paris rebuilds from its own revolution, and yet the myth of the Southern victory lingers as comfort. If the Confederacy can survive divided, perhaps empire can endure modernity. The thought pleases them. It lets them sleep easier. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the two Americas drift further apart. Northern newspapers decry European meddling, warning of a second colonization. Southern papers, eager for prestige, print translations of French articles praising their valor. The ocean fills with correspondence, with treaties and tariffs, with promises written in ink and ambition. Somewhere between those tides, the dream of independence begins to blur into dependence once more. In New Orleans, a merchant's child watches a British ship unload crates of machinery under the golden dusk. The child hears sailors singing in a language foreign yet familiar. And in that moment, the new world feels smaller than it ever did. The hum of trade becomes the lullaby of a generation born after the war. Children who will grow up thinking that partnership with Europe was destiny, not design. But destiny is fickle. The same empires that once courted the South now sense new storms gathering. The world is changing. Germany rises, Italy unites, and across the Pacific, Japan opens its gates to the modern age. The Confederacy's alliances, once precious, begin to feel outdated. European attention drifts toward Africa, toward Asia, toward whatever remains unclaimed. The South finds itself once more alone. Its riches spent, its soil exhausted, its friends distracted by their own appetites. Still, the legacy of that attention remains. The architecture of Charleston bears French ornament now. The universities of Richmond teach law in the Roman style. The etiquette of London salons colors the manners of Mississippi planters. The Confederacy, in seeking validation, has become something both foreign and familiar. A hybrid nation, proud of its independence yet shaped by the very empires it sought to impress. And somewhere in a quiet field outside Atlanta, an old soldier watches the sunset and remembers a different dream. He recalls the war's first march, when men spoke of defending home and honor, not of trade agreements and tariffs. He wonders whether victory ever truly belonged to those who fought, or only to those who came after with ledgers and pens. Europe, meanwhile, moves on. The world spins toward a century of industry and empire, of inventions and upheavals no one yet imagines. The Confederate flag still flies, though its edges fray in the coastal wind. Across the sea in the parlors of power it has become more symbol than state, an emblem of what could have been, or perhaps what should never have been. By the century's close, few in Europe still speak of the Southern miracle. The fashion has shifted. The cotton once prized is replaced by textiles from India and Egypt. The Grand Alliance quietly dissolves into memory, leaving behind only the architecture, the debts, and the faint perfume of lost opportunity. Yet in the quiet hours before dawn, some old merchant in London might still remember the letters signed by Richmond's envoys, the toasts made to the Confederacy eternal, and feel the ghost of history's unfinished bargain. And across the ocean, as the moonlight falls on the calm waters of Charleston Harbor, the ships lie still. Their flags ripple softly, reflecting stars both real and imagined. The empire of Europe has withdrawn, but its shadow lingers, etched into the marble of government halls, the design of coins, the cadence of speech. A new century waits beyond the horizon, and with it the question that has haunted both continents. Can any nation, however victorious, remain truly free when the eyes of empires never close? The night wind carries that question out to sea. The lamps in the port flicker, the waves sigh against the hulls, and history drifts once more into silence. Perfect, keeping the same calm, cinematic, fall-asleep two-tone as the previous chapters, poetic, immersive, reflective, with slow, emotional rhythm. Here is your 500-word Chapter 7, Shadows of a New Century. The century turns quietly. No cannon fire, no parades, just the whisper of a clock moving past midnight. The year is 1900, and across the broad shoulders of the American continent, two nations breathe beneath the same sky, their hearts beating out of rhythm, their destinies still entwined like roots that refuse to part. To the north, smoke curls from iron towers, the clang of steel, the rumble of rail, the pulse of invention. Factories hum through sleepless nights, their windows glowing like constellations born of coal and current. To the south, moonlight spills over magnolia trees and quiet fields, where the scent of cotton and the weight of memory hang thick in the air. Richmond gleams with marble pride, Charleston with nostalgia. The stars and bars drift gently in the humid breeze, as if unaware that the world has begun to turn faster than ever before. Two Americas, one of machines, one of myths. One looks forward with restless hunger, the other looks backwards, seeking comfort in the ghosts of its own creation. Yet both share the same unease, a feeling that something vast and invisible has begun to move beneath their feet. The North thrives on energy now, not the kind born from wood and fire, but from motion itself. Telegraphs sing through copper veins stretched across borders that can never be truly sealed. Electric lights bloom like new suns in cities that never sleep: Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, their streets alive with faces from every corner of the earth. Immigrants pour through northern ports, their dreams tethered to opportunity, their hands building a new world from wire and steam. Across that unseen border, the South watches with both admiration and quiet defiance. Its cities, smaller and slower, stand proud in their restraint. Horse-drawn carriages clatter down streets lined with gas lamps, and music drifts from verandas where time itself seems reluctant to pass. The South calls its pace dignity. The North calls it denial. In Richmond, the government of the Confederacy sits beneath portraits of its founders, men whose faces are half shadow, half legend. The politicians debate progress with the precision of theologians. How much modernity can be allowed before tradition cracks? How many machines can whir before the song of the Old South fades from memory? Factories rise along the Mississippi, though never in the great numbers that fill the northern horizon. The South's wealth still bleeds from its soil, its cotton, its sugar, its tobacco. It trades not only with Europe now, but increasingly with the industrial North, a quiet irony lost on few. In a world of wires and wheels, even independence is tangled. And beneath the polite politics and proud speeches, something older still festers. The chains that once clinked in fields have been replaced by laws that bind invisibly, segregation inked into every ledger, every courthouse, every school. Freedom, promised too late, still waits outside the gates. In the moonlight, the old songs are still sung, though now they rise from church pews instead of the rows of cotton. The South, for all its victory, cannot silence the sound of conscience. The North, too, wrestles with ghosts. The war that ended decades ago still lingers in its monuments, in its textbooks, in its very sense of purpose. Progress has become its religion, and yet it cannot escape the feeling that something was lost, something that unity, for all its flaws, once gave it. Workers strike in the shadow of steel mills. Great fortunes rise and fall in the blink of an eye. The Republic of Industry hums like a machine, but even machines grow tired. Between these two Americas runs more than just a border. It is a river of memory, a gulf of language and belief. The trains cross it daily, carrying goods, letters, and sometimes love. A Union engineer may write to his brother on a Confederate plantation. A Southern merchant may invest in Northern stock. The telegraph wires hum their shared heartbeat, a reminder that the dream of separation was never truly complete. And beyond both nations, the world itself is changing. The 20th century dawns not with peace, but with ambition. Europe's empires stretch their fingers across Africa and Asia. Japan rises from isolation. The Ottoman twilight dims. America, or rather, the Americas, must now find their place in this shifting constellation of power. In Washington, Northern diplomats speak of innovation, trade, influence. In Richmond, Southern envoys speak of honor, sovereignty, and the right to remain unaltered. Yet both send ships into the same oceans, both seek the same foreign markets, both dream of being more than what the war left them. And perhaps, for the first time in decades, the two nations begin to glimpse one another not as enemies, but as rivals, different mirrors of the same ambition. Still, suspicion runs deep. In northern newspapers, editorials warn of southern spies, of aristocrats plotting to sway Latin America. In southern broadsheets, writers accuse the North of cultural decay, of worshipping the machine at the expense of the soul. Propaganda becomes its own kind of border, invisible, but stronger than stone. Yet even through mistrust, there is fascination. Northern travelers visit New Orleans captivated by its blend of French, Spanish, and Confederate charm. Southern students attend universities in Boston and Philadelphia, returning home with strange new ideas about democracy, science, and art. They bring back books, inventions, and the faint spark of modern rebellion. In this quiet exchange, unspoken, unplanned, the two Americas begin to influence one another once more. The century moves forward like a locomotive through fog. The North's cities grow taller, their skylines daring the heavens. The South's plantations give way to towns, its fields divided, its wealth spread thinner across a population that no longer lives entirely by the land. But beneath progress lies unease. The children of the war's survivors grow old, and the young no longer remember what unity once felt like. They know only rivalry, stories of glory, of betrayal, of what might have been. In 1901, as the first automobiles sputter to life in Detroit, the Confederacy debates its own future. Some whisper of reconciliation, of a Pan-American alliance, as the newspapers call it, but the thought dies quickly. Too much blood has been spilled, too much pride engraved into national identity. And yet, in the quiet rooms of merchants and ministers, plans are drawn for trade treaties, for the building of new railroads that might one day link Richmond to Chicago again. Economy begins to do what politics could not, to bridge what battle once broke. Beyond the borders, the rest of the world takes note. Europe still trades with both, but its interest wanes. The eyes of empire now look east, toward the colonies of Africa and Asia, toward the Pacific, where America, or at least one of its halves, must someday contend for influence. The Confederacy, ever conscious of prestige, sends envoys to London and Paris to remind them it still stands. The North sends inventors and financiers whose machines and ideas speak louder than words. And between these hemispheres of pride, the land itself remains the same rivers that once ran red now glitter gold at sunset. The same mountains divide, the same plains stretch unbroken from horizon to horizon. The earth remembers unity even when men forget. In the South, old veterans sit on porches and watch their grandchildren play, the wars of their youth fading into bedtime stories. They speak of honor, of valor, of flags folded and stored away. Yet as the evening deepens, a quiet doubt seeps into their voices. Was it worth it? They wonder. Was the cost of freedom the price of becoming smaller, lonelier in a world that no longer measures greatness by glory but by progress? In the North, the grandchildren of soldiers grow restless in their own way. They dream not of reuniting the nation, but of surpassing it, of building cities that touch the clouds, of harnessing power that can light the world. They look south and see not enemies, but an echo, and perhaps deep down, a hint of envy for the South, for all its scars still feels old, still feels eternal. The dawn of the new century brings inventions that neither nation can fully control: the telephone, the automobile, the motion picture. Voices and images cross borders faster than armies ever could. For the first time, the two Americas share something intangible: sound, light, and the flicker of moving dreams. A film shown in New York might find an audience in Richmond. A Southern song recorded on wax might play in a Chicago parlor. Culture begins to blur the lines that politics once drew so carefully. Yet, for every bridge built in art, another wall rises in ideology. The North preaches democracy's renewal through reason and science. The South proclaims virtue through heritage and honor. Each insists it holds the soul of what America was meant to be, and both, in their own way, are right and wrong. By 1910, the century's shadow stretches long. The old generation fades from the stage, leaving behind two nations unsure whether they have outlived their own myths. The North stands proud and weary, its cities glittering but crowded. The South stands graceful and haunted, its fields golden but tired. Both are changing faster than their hearts can bear. And still, in quiet moments, the question rises like mist over the Mississippi. Can a nation truly split its destiny? Can two halves of one dream walk separate paths and still call themselves whole? No one can answer, though many try. Politicians promise harmony. Poets mourn the loss of it. Preachers insist that division was ordained. But beneath all their words, the land itself hums softly, a note of memory carried by rivers and wind, the old song of a union that once was, and perhaps in the secret rhythm of the earth, still is. Night falls over both republics. In the North, factory lights flicker like distant stars. In the South, fireflies drift through cypress trees, their glow as ancient as faith. Somewhere on that invisible border, the two lights meet for a moment, steel and firefly, industry and memory, and the darkness between them seems, just briefly, to fade. The century has turned and history sleeps with one eye open. The past has not vanished, it has only changed its form. And as the world quickens toward its uncertain future, both Americas, divided yet bound, drift onward beneath the same wide, forgiving sky. The world catches fire again. It begins not in the fields of Virginia or the streets of Richmond, but in the alleys of Sarajevo, where a single shot cracks open the heart of an empire. The old world, that tired map of monarchs and colonies, begins to unravel. Europe, swollen with pride and powder, turns inward and explodes. And across the Atlantic, two Americas watch the horizon burn. The year is 1914. The air carries the hum of machines and the scent of blood remembered. For half a century, the Union and the Confederacy have walked separate paths, two nations pretending their stories have fully diverged. Yet when the cannons thunder across the Atlantic, both feel the echo in their bones. For they were born of war, shaped by division, and neither has forgotten the taste of it. The Union watches with wary sympathy as democracies call for defense, as small nations plead for freedom from kings and kaisers. Its newspapers print headlines of outrage, of invaded Belgium, of toppled cities, of trenches filled with mud and dreams. Industry gears up again, not for rebuilding this time, but for battle. Steel, once meant for bridges, turns once more to bullets and bayonets. In factories lit by electric glare, the hum of machinery sounds almost like memory, the same rhythm that once forged cannonballs for Antietam. In the Confederacy, the mood is different. The war is seen through another lens, not as a fight for liberty, but for sovereignty. To Richmond, Europe's monarchies mirror its own ideals of order and hierarchy. The Southern press speaks of honor, of alliances with civilized nations, of standing beside empires that respect tradition and trade. It is not merely politics, it is identity. The South sees in the crowns of Europe something familiar, the belief that heritage, not equality, defines destiny. As diplomats cross the ocean and ambassadors dine beneath chandeliers, the world waits to see which America will step forward first. The Union, bound to its ideals of democracy, aligns quietly with Britain and France. The Confederacy, tied by commerce and culture, leans toward the Central Powers, Germany, Austria, the echoes of empire. And suddenly the ghosts of Gettysburg stir again. Brothers once divided by blue and gray now wear different shades of khaki and tan, their loyalties drawn not by geography but by philosophy. The 20th century begins with the 19th still bleeding through. In the quiet towns of Tennessee, mothers whisper prayers for sons marching under foreign flags. In the factories of Ohio, girls pack ammunition, never knowing that some may be used against men who speak their own language. The Atlantic becomes a mirror, reflecting both the progress and the pain of a divided world. When the ships depart, great gray beasts cutting through fog and salt, both nations tell themselves they are fighting for peace. The Union sends its legions of industry, its engineers, its dreamers, its machines. The Confederacy sends its cavalry, its pride, its ancient codes of honor. Each believes history will vindicate them. Each believes their cause, though distant from the fields of Europe, is somehow righteous. But the trenches have no patience for righteousness. Mud does not care for flags. The sky above Flanders sees no difference between the prayers of a Virginian and the songs of a Minnesotan. In the thunder of artillery, accents vanish, brotherhood returns, cruel and accidental. Two Americas born together, sundered apart, now spill blood again, this time not for themselves, but for the world. In a frozen trench near Ypres, a Confederate lieutenant finds a torn photograph of a family in Massachusetts tucked into the coat of a fallen enemy. He stares at the child's smile, the ink-smudged words on the back, "Come home soon, Papa." He does not weep, but something deep inside him cracks a fissure no rifle could mend. He realizes the truth that both nations tried to bury. Division can shape borders, but not hearts. The newspapers back home tell the story differently. The Union press hails the March of Liberty, the defense of modern civilization against tyranny. The Confederate broadsheets speak of standing with the ancient order of Europe, preserving the dignity of tradition in a chaotic age. Both print victory where there is only stalemate. Both promise triumph, but the faces of the dead remain the same, young, uncertain, afraid. The war drags on, devouring years, consuming nations. The Union's industry roars, producing more than it ever has. The Confederacy's plantations turn to factories out of necessity, their railways rumbling with supplies bound for ports that lead to the front. Even as they fight on opposite sides, they mirror one another in purpose. War once again binds them through contradiction. And yet, somewhere in the midst of this global storm, a strange kind of understanding flickers. Northern and Southern officers meet on neutral ground, prisoners exchanged, letters delivered through secret channels. Some write of peace, of unity, of remembering the old country that once was. Most do not write at all. They simply stare at the same distant stars, wondering how far home has drifted. By 1917, the world is weary. Europe's trenches have become graves carved into the earth's skin. Empires totter, kingdoms crumble. The Union, now fully committed, sends fleets of ships bristling with new inventions, tanks, airplanes, the strange whisper of wireless radio. The Confederacy, proud but stretched thin, clings to its alliances even as its people begin to question the cost. Cotton cannot buy eternity. Pride cannot feed the hungry. In the summer of that year, the impossible happens. On the fields of France, in a storm of artillery and smoke, Northern and Southern soldiers collide, no longer as one nation, but as enemies shaped by the same inheritance. For a few terrible hours, the ghosts of the Civil War return in flesh and bone. A Confederate regiment from Georgia meets a Union division from Pennsylvania on opposite sides of a nameless ridge. When the shelling ceases, the field is silent. And in that silence, history's cruel symmetry is complete. Word of the battle reaches both continents, and neither knows what to make of it. Politicians call it tragedy. Poets call it destiny. But the mothers who read the casualty lists understand it for what it is, proof that the war between brothers never truly ended. When the Great War finally collapses into armistice, the world is unrecognizable. The monarchies the Confederacy had trusted lie in ruins, their empires stripped and staggering. The democracies the Union had defended emerge bloodied but unbroken, standing taller in moral triumph, if not in spirit. Across both Americas, parades roll through the streets, victory celebrated, sacrifice sanctified. But beneath the confetti and anthems, the unease remains. What has truly been won, and at what cost? The Union, though exhausted, finds itself at the dawn of something new, a power that reaches beyond borders, beyond oceans. Its factories have grown into engines of the modern age. Its ideals of democracy have become the language of the world's hope. The Confederacy, by contrast, finds itself stranded, its allies fallen, its markets unsteady, its pride intact, but its relevance uncertain. The South, once courted by Europe, now stands quietly apart, clinging to memory in an age that worships motion. Yet in the quiet aftermath, both nations begin to feel the same ache, the longing to forget. They build monuments not to victory but to endurance. In Richmond, a marble angel stands over the graves of men who never returned. In Washington, an eternal flame burns for soldiers whose names were lost in mud. The flame and the angel separate, yet watching over the same sorrow. The 1920s arrive like a dream of light after storm. The world dances to jazz. The cities pulse with rhythm. Airplanes skim the clouds. Radios sing across borders. Young men who never fought in Europe grow restless, eager to live, to love, to drown the memory of war in sound and speed. And in that shared desire to forget, to move forward, to feel alive again, the two Americas find something quietly familiar. For a moment, the border softens. Northern investors pour money into Southern oil and timber. Southern music fills Northern clubs. Trains and trade hum between them, and for the first time in half a century, they begin to look less like enemies and more like distant kin. But the wounds are deep, and peace built on fatigue is never true peace. The past watches from the shadows, patient and unyielding. Beyond the sea, Europe rebuilds itself from ruin, nations rearranged, empires dissolved, ideologies fermenting in the vacuum left behind. And both Americas, separated yet tied, sense that this fragile calm will not last. They see it in the headlines, hear it in the speeches, feel it in the tremor of markets that once seemed invincible. The world is holding its breath again. By the late 1930s, another storm begins to rise. The Union, older now but wiser, watches as tyranny spreads across continents once more. The Confederacy, still proud, hesitates, bound by history, tempted by neutrality, uncertain which side its ideals now favor. And somewhere deep in both nations, the ghosts of the past stir awake. For the pattern is familiar. War beyond the sea has a way of reaching every shore. But for now, the two Americas wait. Factories hum, ports swell, and history turns its gaze toward the horizon. The lessons of the last century lie buried beneath monuments and myths, yet their echoes remain a soft murmur beneath the roar of progress. Somewhere, in an attic in New Orleans, a Confederate war medal lies beside a faded Northern flag, relics of a story that refused to end. And perhaps, in that quiet pairing, there is something truer than all the speeches and treaties that followed. That no victory, no division, no ideology can erase the memory of what they once were together. The sea between continents lies calm now, but the sky darkens with prophecy. The old world will burn again, and when it does, the question will return like a tide. Will the two Americas once more face each other across foreign fields, or finally stand side by side? The wind off the Atlantic carries no answer. Only the sigh of waves, the hum of ships, and the faint whisper of memory, a lullaby for nations born of the same storm, still dreaming of peace they have yet to truly find. There comes a moment in every nation's life when history becomes a mirror, one that reflects not what was, but what could have been. By the dawn of the 1930s, the mirror stands between two Americas. One shines with steel and electricity, its skyline a forest of ambition. The other glows with gold and memory, its fields endless, its spirit unbroken. Both believe themselves free, both believe themselves blessed. And yet, in the quiet hours before dawn, both dream of the same thing, wholeness. The South has grown wealthy again. Cotton is no longer its only coin. Oil now flows beneath its soil. Railroads stretch deep into Mexico, and its ports hum with foreign ships bearing silks and spices. Richmond gleams with marble and brass, a capital reborn in the image of empire. Its mansions rise like monuments to a past that never died, their columns white and proud against the blue sky. But beneath the chandeliers and verandas, unease lingers. The South, triumphant yet weary, senses something hollow in its victory. The songs of glory no longer echo as sweetly as they once did. Even the magnolias seem to sigh in the heat. Across the border, the North pulses with electricity and invention. Chicago hums with machinery. Detroit roars with engines. New York glitters like a constellation on Earth. From the hum of radio towers to the spark of streetlights, it feels unstoppable, a nation in motion, driven by steel, speed, and restless intellect. But behind the brilliance lies exhaustion. The factories that built empires now cage men in 12-hour days. Smoke clouds the sunrise and the rivers run gray. Progress hums like a hymn, but few remember the words anymore. The North is haunted not by failure, but by memory of what it fought for and of what it lost to win. It has built towers taller than cathedrals, yet beneath them men still kneel before the same quiet doubts. Did victory truly mend the soul of the Union, or did it merely give it new walls to hide behind? In the South, the same question whispers through the cotton fields and the marble halls alike. Was defeat ever truly defeat if the world bent back toward your ways? The Confederacy, still proud of its independence, measures its worth not in freedom, but in endurance. It stands as proof that time can bend, that history can fracture and still continue. And yet, even among the proudest generals' portraits, the feeling grows that something or someone was left behind when the flags first parted. The 1930s bring an unease that no anthem can drown. The world beyond America's shores trembles once again. Economies crumble, ideologies clash, the fragile peace after Europe's Great War begins to rot at the edges. And across both Americas, whispers of discontent spread like wildfire. In Richmond and Atlanta, laborers speak of rights once denied. In New York and Chicago, millionaires rise and fall with the tick of a clock. It is a decade of rhythm and ruin, jazz on one street corner, hunger on the next. Jazz, that wild, living thing, becomes the first true language both nations share again. Born in the South's sorrow and reborn in the North's ambition, it flows like a river that no border can stop. In smoky bars of New Orleans, trumpets weep for ghosts. In Chicago, saxophones answer with laughter that sounds almost like rebellion. For the first time in generations, the sound of one America reaches the ears of the other. And through that rhythm, syncopated, chaotic, alive, they begin quietly to remember each other. Music becomes what politics could not, a bridge. It carries memory without bitterness, pride without armor. A Confederate officer's grandson learns the blues from a black guitarist on Bourbon Street. A Northern journalist writes of it, calling it the sound of something returning home. He is not wrong. For when the horns rise and the drums beat, both North and South can almost taste the dream that fractured time and imagine for a fleeting second what it would have sounded like whole. But dreams, like nations, are fragile things. The Great Depression strikes both Americas like a silent war. Banks collapse, fields wither, factories close. The laughter fades from the clubs, and the cities grow quiet again. Men who once built empires now stand in breadlines. The South, With its old systems of wealth and hierarchy, it tries to hold its order together. The North, built on commerce and innovation, struggles to remember compassion amid the chaos. Both realize, painfully, that no flag, no ideology can feed a hungry child. It is in this suffering that a strange sense of unity begins to stir, not through politics, but through pain. Across the old border, stories of shared struggle echo. Letters travel again between cousins long estranged. Preachers speak of brotherhood in sermons that would have been treason half a century earlier. And though governments stay silent, people begin to remember what history tried to erase, that their fates were never meant to be separate. Yet even as empathy flickers, the world darkens. In Europe, new empires rise from ruin. Speeches fill the air with the old music of conquest and purity. Marching boots echo through cities that once promised peace. And across the Atlantic, both Americas watch again as the old world slides toward madness. The question that has haunted them since Appomattox returns with dreadful clarity. Can a nation divided stand apart while the rest of the world falls together or apart? In Richmond's marble halls, the Confederate Senate debates neutrality. They speak of commerce, of sovereignty, of not repeating Europe's mistakes. But behind the polite words lies fear that the tide of history may not stop at the sea. In Washington, the Union Congress debates the same, and behind their speeches, a similar dread hums. Two nations so different in creed and origin now find themselves bound again by anxiety. For both have come too far to retreat and not far enough to escape their reflection in one another. By the late 1930s, radio crackles with war again. The air is filled with voices, Churchill, Hitler, Roosevelt, and between them the static hum of destiny. Factories awaken, soldiers drill. Once more, the oceans are not wide enough to contain the world's fury. The Confederacy, still steeped in its old pride, leans toward neutrality but quietly trades with the old empires. The Union, more resolute, aligns with democracy and industry, its memory of the First Great War still burning. And yet, in every newsroom and church pew, there lingers the same unspoken thought. If the world burns again, can the Americas remain untouched? Historians of the age begin to ask a quieter, more dangerous question. Was victory ever truly victory? Did the Union's triumph preserve democracy or simply delay its next test? Did the Confederacy's survival protect heritage or merely imprison it in amber? And if both have become something neither Lincoln nor Lee could recognize, what then remains of the dream that once united them? Philosophers, poets, and preachers take up the question. But it is in the songs, always the songs, that the answer hides. In Harlem, a trumpet cries out against injustice with notes sharp as lightning. In New Orleans, an old man plays a slow, mournful tune about freedom he never saw. And in both, the melody meets somewhere in the middle, a place neither nation owns but both still feel. The 1940s dawn like a storm. War beyond the sea pulls both Americas toward it once more. The Union sends fleets and bombers, the Confederacy traders and diplomats. But this time, something has shifted. There is no joy in marching, no glory in banners. Only the quiet resignation of two peoples who have learned that time does not heal, it merely repeats. When the bombs fall on London, both nations grieve. When Paris falls, both tremble. And when the first whispers of atomic power reach their shores, both stare into the same dark horizon and wonder what future remains to be split. By the end of the war, the world has changed beyond recognition. The Union stands tall, a titan of industry, a beacon of democracy, yet its cities hum with discontent and fatigue. The Confederacy survives, proud and rich, its borders intact, yet its soul feels older than time, its people restless beneath the weight of heritage. Both are victors in their own eyes. Both are haunted in their own ways. And in the quiet after the world's fire fades, both hear the same ghostly question echo once more. If destiny can be divided, can it ever be fulfilled? The mid-century years bring new wonders, televisions glowing in living rooms, highways cutting across the continent, rockets piercing the edge of sky. The world moves faster than ever before. The Union revels in innovation. The Confederacy finds beauty in preservation. But between them, the invisible border hums still faint, eternal, like the crack in an old bell that keeps ringing no matter how long the silence lasts. In the North, schoolchildren recite oaths to progress and unity. In the South, they sing hymns to faith and tradition. Yet when night falls, they listen to the same radio broadcasts, laugh at the same comedies, and dance to the same songs. Unwittingly, a new generation begins to stitch together what their ancestors tore apart, not with politics or war, but with rhythm, curiosity, and love. For love, unlike nations, cannot be divided. By the 1960s, the world calls it the American century, but no one can quite say which America it belongs to. The Union rules the airwaves and the markets. The Confederacy rules the culture of the heart. The North builds, the South remembers. Together, without ever agreeing, they define an age. And beneath it all, the dream that fractured time still shimmers, not dead, not alive, but waiting. It waits in the footsteps of those who cross the border every day to work, to learn, to live. It waits in the music that travels from one station to another, unnoticed. It waits in the questions no historian dares to answer aloud. If unity was never restored, why does it still haunt every song, every story, every dream? The century marches on, rockets reach the moon, walls fall in Berlin, computers hum in glass towers. And somewhere in all that noise, the two Americas find themselves staring at the same horizon once more. A South grown wealthy, but restless. A North ascendant, yet haunted. Both standing at the edge of the same question, the one they began with, the one that will never fade. Was victory ever truly victory, or merely the pause between two halves of a whole? As the decades fade into dusk, the dream remains half memory, half prophecy. In jazz halls in New Orleans, old trumpets still whisper to the night. In factories in Chicago, the hum of machines keeps rhythm with their beat. And somewhere between the two, carried on the wind, the old song rises again, the song of what might have been, of what could yet be. For the American dream, split in two, yet forever entwined, does not die. It drifts like a melody unfinished, waiting for a chorus that time has not yet found. And perhaps someday, when the rivers run quiet and the cities fall still, the two halves will meet again, not as nations, but as echoes finally made whole. Centuries later, the rivers still remember. They move as they always have, slow, patient, unbothered by the rise and fall of flags. Their waters carry silt and memory, blending both without care for borders. Once they divided two nations, now they simply flow indifferent, eternal, murmuring songs too old for men to understand. Along their banks, the ghosts of soldiers no longer march. The old battlefields have been reclaimed by time, forests where cannon once thundered, meadows where smoke once hung thick. Children chase fireflies over forgotten trenches. The earth remembers the weight of sacrifice but no longer bleeds for it. And if the wind blows just right on a quiet night, some say you can still hear the soft hum of a bugle not calling to war, but to rest. The centuries have changed everything and nothing. Two nations, once fierce, now old, stand on either side of the same idea, their borders still traced by rivers, mountains, and pride. The North, towering and bright, its skylines made of glass and light. The South, wide and warm, its fields golden beneath the endless sun. They have traded muskets for satellites, trains for highways, flags for brands, yet somewhere beneath it all the same old heartbeats remain. The United States of the North, the Confederate States of the South, names spoken now like relics from a forgotten prayer, each claiming freedom, each claiming truth, each gazing across the border not with anger anymore but with something gentler, recognition, regret, a quiet wondering at what might have been if they had never parted ways. The world they inhabit no longer needs them to be enemies. Global trade, digital empires, and spaceflight have blurred the lines of the 19th century beyond repair. Yet even as satellites orbit above, beaming light across both nations, an invisible divide still hums below. It's no longer in armies or politics. It lives in the rhythm of speech, in the memory of old songs, in the silent choices of identity whispered from parent to child. A cultural scar, faint but permanent. The South remembers its heritage with pride tempered by sorrow. Its cities have grown Atlanta a jewel of technology, Richmond a hub of art and quiet dignity. Old plantations have become museums. Visitors walk through their halls not in reverence, but in reflection. They trace their fingers across the wood of history, feeling both its craftsmanship and its cruelty. For the South learned, too late perhaps, that victory carries the same weight as guilt, that independence bought with suffering does not age gracefully. Across the border, the North has become a giant of its own making. Cities like Chicago and Boston hum with energy, clean, modern, ever expanding. The industries that once scarred its skies now reach for sustainability and innovation. Its universities shape the minds of the world. Its culture radiates outward in waves of influence. Yet beneath all its brilliance, a certain weariness lingers, the weight of always believing itself the moral victor, even when time proved morality more complicated than anyone could bear. For centuries, the North defined itself by what it opposed. And when the South was no longer its adversary, it found itself staring into a mirror. The reflection was not always kind. Empires of commerce replaced empires of conquest. Chains were broken, yes, but new ones, invisible and digital, took their place. Freedom, once a cry shouted from battlefields, became something more elusive. A contract, a password, a choice buried under noise. In the quiet of the modern age, both nations find themselves haunted by the same question. What is America, and who does it belong to? The answers shift like the light on the Mississippi. Some say America was never a place at all, but an idea too vast for one nation to hold. An idea so powerful it had to fracture, to exist in contrast with itself. Freedom and order, tradition and progress, faith and reason. Perhaps in dividing, it ensured its own survival, each half carrying what the other could not bear alone. The ghosts of Lincoln and Lee have long since faded into myth. Their names still grace streets and schools, their faces carved in marble and memory. But history, ever restless, has softened them. No longer hero and rebel, no longer saint and sinner, just men caught in the gravity of their times, trying to make sense of impossible choices. If they could look upon their world now, a world of machines that think, of skies crossed by silent drones, of nations united by fiber and divided by truth, what would they see? Would they recognize what they built and broke? Would they understand that their war never truly ended, it only changed form? In this alternate timeline, the Civil War's outcome reshaped not just the continent, but the consciousness of mankind. Without unity, the dream of manifest destiny splintered. The South looked east to Europe, rekindling old alliances. The North looked west to the Pacific, reaching toward new frontiers. Two paths of progress diverging, one rooted in heritage, the other in innovation. And yet, for all their difference, their destinies remained intertwined, orbiting each other like twin stars, never colliding, never escaping. By the 22nd century, their histories have merged again, not politically, but spiritually. Young people from both sides travel freely, their accents blending, their loyalties fading into something simpler. Humanity. They no longer care who won or lost the war 2 centuries ago. They care only for what can still be built from its remains. A southern artist and a northern scientist share a coffee in New Orleans. A historian from Boston gives lectures in Charleston on shared memory and reconciliation. The rivers that once divided now carry cruises, commerce, laughter. And though old monuments still stand, some wept over, some ignored, the earth around them has grown soft with forgiveness. Still, there are those who cling to the past, who speak of flags and causes with trembling pride. But their voices grow fewer each year, their memories fading into the hum of modern life. Time has a way of dimming even the fiercest convictions. It does not erase them, it simply weaves them into new stories. Stories of unity born not from treaties but from time's quiet mercy. In museums, schoolchildren stand before photographs of the war, black and white faces staring through smoke and chaos. The guide's voice is gentle, almost reverent, as she explains that this was the war that split America in two. Some of the children frown. They cannot imagine a world where America was ever anything but one vast, varied place. The idea of two flags seems strange to them, like an old myth, tragic but unreal. And perhaps in their innocence they touch upon something truer than history itself. For the longer the centuries stretch, the less the division matters. The lines fade, the wounds scar over, and all that remains is the story of a people who dared to build a nation, lost it, rebuilt it again, and learned that perhaps it was never meant to be one shape forever. The rivers keep flowing, the fields keep growing, the songs keep changing, yet all of them still hum with that same familiar undertone, that old heartbeat of possibility. And if you listen closely, beyond the hum of cities and the static of time, you can almost hear the whisper. It was never truly about victory or defeat. It was about the dream itself, the fragile, impossible dream of liberty, endlessly reaching for perfection, forever just beyond the horizon. In this world where the South had won, there are no victors left to celebrate. Only inheritors, people who live in the long shadow of decisions made before their great-grandparents were born. They carry the burden of remembering without reliving. And in that, perhaps, lies a kind of peace, the peace that comes not from conquest, but from acceptance. As twilight falls over the continent, the landscape tells its own story. From the shining towers of Washington to the sunlit squares of Savannah, the light touches everything evenly. There is no border in the sunset. The same wind that rustles the wheat in Kansas bends the cypress in Louisiana. The same stars shine over both flags, still rippling in the same night air, neither triumphant nor defeated, only enduring. In that silence, history sighs, not in sorrow, but in understanding. It knows now that the dream of America was never about a single union or a single victory. It was about the conversation between opposites, between ideals and realities, between what we are and what we hope to be. It was about the eternal reaching, the struggle toward a better self, even if that self was never found. And so, as centuries turn to dust and time folds in on itself, both nations drift toward the same truth. That unity was never a flag or a treaty. It was a feeling, fleeting, fragile but real. A recognition that for all their differences they were always looking in the same direction. Toward a horizon that still glows faintly with promise. The rivers still remember. The fields still whisper. The stars still watch. And beneath them, two flags, one red and blue, one blue and gray, flutter side by side in the same eternal breeze. No longer enemies, no longer rivals. Just echoes of the same dream, the dream that time could never quite let die. And as the night settles, the land exhales. The wind moves softly through the trees, carrying with it the scent of rain and remembrance. It passes over mountains and rivers, through cities in ruins, over graves long forgotten. And somewhere in that hush, the story of America, the one that never was, the one that might still be, continues to hum beneath the stars. A lullaby for a divided dream. a promise that even the broken can be beautiful, and that sometimes the greatest nations are the ones that live not in maps or monuments, but in the hearts of those who still believe they can be made whole again.